This is the Inclusivity EQ podcast with Saul Gomez, the show that takes you around the world to share interviews with some of the most successful and relevant people on the planet. Hear their stories and get the most important business lessons they've learned on their road to success, and get exclusive access on how to implement their success into your life and business. The Inclusivity EQ podcast is brought to you by the Strategic Advisor Board and your host, Saul Gomez.
Hey, are you looking to scale your business from 5 figures to 6 figures or 6 figures to 7 figures? If you are, I have the perfect thing for you. What I want you to do today is I want you to go download a book. This book is going to take you through my 3-pillar system. It's 100% free. All you have to do is go to growfast.cash. I say again, go to growfast.cash, and you're going to be able to download my free international best-selling book, which is called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. You can take that book. It's going to help you scale your business to the next level. Again, go download it. Be good, be brief, be gone. Growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash. Enjoy.
Welcome, everyone, to the Inclusivity EQ podcast, where we explore the power of inclusion across various industries. I'm your host, Saul Gomez, and in today's episode, we have the distinct privilege of talking with Mr. Hee Won Yoon, a retired United States Marine Corps Master Sergeant and now the Director of Enterprise Business Resiliency at Pentagon Federal, or PenFed Credit Union, where they serve nearly 3 million members worldwide with over $35 billion in assets. A little bit about Mr. Yoon. During his short tenure with PenFed, he's been the recipient of an Impact Award as well as a Force Multiplier Award issued by the Board of Directors. Very impressive, but I'm not surprised given his caliber. Hee Won Yoon, my brother, welcome to the Inclusivity EQ podcast.
Oh, thanks, Saul. Thank you for the warm introduction, my friend. This opportunity certainly is a privilege for me as well, and I'm looking forward to the next hour of great conversation.
Awesome. Likewise. Now, before we get started, I'd like to share a little bit with our listeners that in your current role, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, you spearhead the regulatory compliance administrative functions of the enterprise resiliency management. Tell us a little bit about what that means and what you love most, and conversely, what's the most challenging part about the work that you do?
Yeah, well, the first thing about my current work is the fact that the word resiliency is built into it, because of the fact that my department is labeled or titled Enterprise Business Resiliency Management. It sounds like pretty straightforward, but at the same time, people wonder, like, what does it actually mean, right? What does that entail? Well, let me just tell you that there's no typical day in my line of work, because it's all about the sustainability and survivability of my organization. So everything from business continuity to third-party risk management, as well as disaster recovery. And then, of course, there's crisis and incident management. So imagine all the various things, all the disruptions and all the chaos that may come about. Potentially, I have to deal with that along with my teammates, and then, of course, find ways to mitigate it.
No, absolutely. It's really fascinating, right? So when I read that about you and when you were talking about, what you do, some of the stuff kind of correlate with the military, right? Especially like the disaster recovery, the incident management, and just really continuity, right? I haven't been to, in my military experience, I never went to a command that didn't have a continuity of operations plan. So a lot of correlations there. How has that been, or like how are those the same and how are they different?
The bottom line is that it's just the different types of words and acronyms that are out there. Everything that we do in the Marine Corps, like my Marine Corps experience, or just throughout the Department of Defense, it's all about the transferability and then the translation, right, of the type of things that we already do in the military, and likewise in the civilian sector. And so, for example, we had, when we're deployed, when we're even garrisoned, we had plans called like emergency action plans, right? But then those same plans exist in the corporate world. They just call them differently, but then they're all structured in a similar fashion. And I think that's why we just have to, think about how relatable we are between the DoD and the private sector, more so than a lot of people think.
Absolutely. And now that we know a little bit about what you do in your capacity, I'd like to kind of prime our listeners with a quick narration of what led you here. And folks, He once served 25 years on active duty. And his career included combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, as well as a decade between South Korea and Japan, serving across 14 military occupational specialties. Wow, that's pretty well rounded. And so tell us a little bit more about that, and then I also want you to kind of speak on a little bit of what you did as the Vice President of Business Development for the United States Marine Corps Asian Pacific American Professionals, the first employee resource group, APA resource group in the Marine Corps history, which you also helped to co-found.
That's correct.
Can you expound a little bit on both of those?
Absolutely. So my pleasure. Let me just start off by saying that when we talked about when you mentioned the 14 MOSs, it's not about collecting MOSs, right? Somehow, some way, I just found myself in situations where there were opportunities and I just capitalized on those things, right? But really, it's all about being multifaceted, well-rounded, because especially this day and age, especially with the integration with technology and all the various things within the cyberspace and what have you, everyone's like faster, smarter if you think about it, right? At least book smart, and so you have to really find a way to synthesize and really connect all the tissues between those things. So obviously, I didn't have this playbook or game plan from the get-go, right? I was one of those typical knuckleheads back when I was a teenager, causing havoc, and maybe subconsciously I was trying to fight against the typical Asian stereotype. Oh, my parents were expecting me to become a doctor or a lawyer and kind of go that de facto route. But I also had 3 older sisters. And so I felt like I had 4 moms. And then I was the youngest of the family. Constantly found myself going against the grain. So anyways, what happened was that when I embarked on my Marine Corps career, from humble beginnings as an electronics technician, learned a craft, learned a trade, learned some technical skills because I didn't have a degree coming straight in from high school. But then over a period of time, I just felt like, you know what? I kind of had this sense of belonging, and therefore I basically bloomed where I was planted, right? And then from there, I somehow gravitated towards the different types of challenging duties and other opportunities and started jumping on that. Of course, I'm also bilingual. So I grew up speaking Korean in the house. And so I was able to leverage that as well. And then over a period of time, I went from being a technician to a linguist to even working my way all the way through, running a maintenance management program, and even becoming like a ground communication systems inspector, going across the entire Western Pacific, telling commanding officers or what areas they need to fix, and doing that as a senior enlisted, right? And then even culminating my career as a Northeast area, foreign area staff NCO. But the key to all of that was, being able to think macro, right, like the long-term goals, but also micro. Being able to focus on the task at hand and being able to just, again, achieve the brilliance of the basics, making sure that I know my job inside out and I know other people's jobs inside out, and somehow seamlessly working through all of that, through my thoughts and actions. And then, of course, over time, it helped build my resiliency and adaptability combined with pain and suffering. What I mean by pain and suffering, like you impose upon yourself extra stress or extra responsibility. So for example, stress in the fact that I always jumped on the most challenging roles and responsibilities, as well as higher learning, right? We call it off-duty education for a reason. So there was, even though I did, party and have fun in the earlier years of my Marine Corps career, I realized how important higher learning was. So I decided to take a lot of classes after hours, and then that led to like my bachelor's degree and my master's degree while still in the Marine Corps, right? And so all those things combined, it really helped build character, help build resiliency, and just my absorptive capacity was ever so increased. You mentioned the United States Marine Corps Asian Pacific American Professionals, so let me talk about that very briefly. The thing about that employee resource group is that first of all, I don't want that to be confused with it being some sort of like an affinity group per se. Asian is in there, that it was only open for Asians. Absolutely not. Towards the latter part of my career, I came across a Marine administrative message, and it talked about the FAPAC, Federal Asian Pacific American Council, which is actually an organization that, brings together some, government, employees as well as military members, that are of the Asian heritage, right? And it was an organization that was started back in 1985. And I'm like, I never even heard about it. But the long story short is that, I met, he's a Lieutenant Colonel Sam Hong, but I met this individual of all places, Huntsville, Alabama. That's where they happen to have this FAPAC conference. We did not know that this organization existed at this level. And then we fast forward several months, and then Sam, I would say that he's a primary founder. He pitched the idea about having some sort of almost like a public-private venture where we bring in this academic professional. His name is actually Dr. Vu Pham. We were able to run a pilot conference, and then the showing. We had a great showing, and ultimately that grew into something bigger over the years. Not only did we have to execute that pilot program, we had to do it without any funding, without any support from the Marine Corps. And so we were able to test ourselves, and we validated that. And then we were able to establish some lessons learned. And of course, that allowed us to gain confidence. But everything has to be rooted in a solid foundation. And what I mean by that is we had to have a purpose. Our purpose for that group was to make a stronger United States Marine Corps through a more diverse force represented by Asian Pacific Americans, right? In senior leadership positions. And we make this possible by, connecting, sharing, and educating. That was our purpose. And then, of course, we had to have like a vision, right? Where we want that representation to be consistent through all the ranks. The key thing is that we did not charge dues, membership dues. We did not just keep it to Asian population. We opened it up to all races, all ranks, enlisted or officers. Everything was service member driven, and we had nothing but the respect of each other. I think that's what really it resonated with the with the highest level of leadership throughout the Marine Corps, from our Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps at the time to the Commandant, as well as we were able to get congressional level support all the way up to the Vice President level. So in the most succinct manner possible, even though it may not seem short, that's what that USMC APA organization was all about.
There's so many things that I'm thinking about. I want to back up a little bit. You said something earlier about sense of belonging. And so this thing that you co-created sounds like it kind of enhances that sense of belonging for service members that are of Asian Pacific background. But then also it's not just for them, right? It's very inclusive. It's very open to other folks. And, to your point, you talked about earlier about because you speak Korean, you were valuable, right? You were invaluable to the units because you were able to provide those services, that added support. Had that not been known, would that capability have been there? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I think by being able to see the whole person, not only you as a Marine, but also your demographic background, how do we tie that to the mission? How do we leverage it? And I think in doing so, we create more inclusive spaces that create that sense of belonging. But I want to understand from your perspective, what was that sense of belonging? Where did that come from in your upbringing? And how was that further enhanced through this kind of co-creation of the APA, of the USMC, Asia Pacific American Professionals?
Yeah, it goes all the way back to the 80s, specifically 1984, where at the age of 6, I immigrated to the United States from South Korea. And then so coming to this country where, language and cultural barriers, and also like there weren't that many Asians at the time, in the suburbs of Maryland where I was growing up, and everywhere I looked, nobody looked like me. And so like I always felt out of place, right? So I tried so hard to try to fit in, but that's what I dealt with growing up in the 80s and 90s. And then, of course, by the time I joined the Marine Corps, I also realized that, there were, it's all about like meeting people from all walks of life, right? Because America is a melting pot, and the Marine Corps or any other armed forces branch is a reflection of society. It's a representation of America.
Good, bad, or different, right?
Yeah. Good, bad, or different. Exactly. And I realized that over time, there were a lot of people that had not met people like me, right? Someone like me, of Asian descent. I know like nobody means anything negative by it, but we couldn't help but tell that, yeah, there was a lot of sense of or lack of awareness, right? And so a couple examples of this would be also where, you know, without them even realizing, when they look at us and see an Asian face, somehow they automatically attributed our, image to being like a foreigner, and that, you weren't originally American per se, right? So some of those biases do exist, and so again, some of those challenges and experiences that we went through is what led to, again, the creation of the USMC APA. But the key was tied to the mission. And right now, as you know, there's been a huge initiative going back, let's say even talking about Force Design 2030. We want to increase the presence over in the Asia Pacific theater, especially with, the advances of the Chinese Communist Party, et cetera, and then of course all the different countries within Asia. So it just makes sense. It just made sense to combine forces between what we're doing with USNC APA and also with the mission.
Right. No, absolutely. I love what you said, right? Because it does. I mean, even the biases, right? The good, bad, and indifferent, because they exist. And I think a lot of times there's some missed opportunities when assumptions are made. Organizations like what you mentioned, I think, help bolster not only who we are as a service, right? And where the Marine Corps, Air Force, Navy, Space Force, Coast Guard, whatever the case, but also our own individuality that we bring, right? That seasoning, right? When you make a dish, it's that little seasoning that makes it either a Mexican dish or another dish from somewhere else, right? I joke with people and I try to kind of bring relevance to food, that, we're no different than food, right? In Mexico, we call them tacos. In the Middle East, they call them shawarmas, right? So I think there's a lot of similarities there, but as long as we are oriented and have that sense of understanding of what we're orienting all these things towards, in your case with the Marines, is how do we tie it to the mission? How do we create this awareness so that others like you that are bilingual will be willing to say, hey, I can speak that language. Let me come and support the mission.
Well, I mean, it's definitely not a science. All of this is really an art, right? So I think, again, I mentioned the words brilliance of the basics. You just really have to get down to the basics, just as fellow human beings, right? So one of the things I can, let's say think about is, trying to achieve some sort of synergy and harmony when it comes to all of these things, and overcome the various isms, right? and whatever types of stereotypical things that we may have in mind, or all the biases, because they can easily, kind of bleed over into some negative energy and negative things, right? And negative thoughts, and definitely lead to potential negative actions.
Absolutely.
But and this is why we want to ensure that, this entire sense of belonging, we got to understand, like, what does it actually mean, right? So like we want to like make sure that if we're in an organization or we're part of some sort of entity, that we want to feel respected, but we also want to be empowered to contribute with our unique strengths, establishing rapport, establishing cross-cultural communication, but it's through understanding each other's backgrounds. And to some extent, it also helps to educate yourself on some of the historical implications, right? Of why people are the way they are, or why certain cultures are the way they are. So again, it goes back to brilliance of the basics, because at the end of the day, that's going to help us bridge communication gaps. We want to, deepen the self-awareness.
I want to kind of touch on that and hone in on that. What does inclusion mean to you? How do you define it? What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like in your capacity, in your world?
Having this, when I say the term, having the seat at the table is so important to me, because if someone's qualified based on the individual's accomplishments and their set of experiences, if they go into some sort of like organization, they should never experience, like, let's say, imposter syndrome, right? Where because people, if they treat you or look at you a certain way, then all of a sudden, as a human being, that does start to impact you adversely, right? Potentially, right? Negatively. And so we want to be mindful of that. We want to be able to have situational awareness first and foremost, because we have to actually have a personal understanding at the individual level. So that way we are more, approachable. We are more accepting of feedback. We have to also be willing, we have to be willing to admit our own mistake in order for inclusion to even happen. How can you have inclusivity, without practicing any of that? It has to be an inherent part of your life, and this is especially important if you're a leader, if you're a manager of people. If we don't have inclusion, that means you're not curious. You're not curious about others' background, and then that's going to counter against the promotion of creativity, innovation, and open-mindedness. You cannot achieve any of that, that you're already behind the power curve.
Absolutely, man. I love what you said about that, right? It's because it truly is about introspection and knowing yourself first. Because I can do this all day, especially as a leader. But if I'm doing this and I'm not doing it, there's a word for it, right? And the nice word of it is irony. Do as I say, not as I do. I think it's especially important for leaders and managers to have that introspection and know themselves. And I'm thinking about my Diomi days. In Diomi, we studied this thing called the Johari window. So the Johari window has 4 quadrants, right? The first one is things about me that I know and you know about me as well. And then the other quadrant is things that I know about myself that you don't know about me, right? And then the third quadrant is things that you know about me that I don't know about myself. And then the fourth quadrant is things that neither you or I know about me. And so I think it's opening up those windows so that we become more self-aware, and through that journey, find out things that we both didn't know about me, and vice versa, right? And so I think the Johari window kind of drives that point home about self-reflection and introspection, because how we show up in the world often has a ripple effect into everything that we do. Another point I want to bring up about just the military and inclusion is education for enlisted personnel. Yes, there's tuition assistance, but you have a pretty impressive education portfolio to begin with, right? You have a bachelor's in science and electronic systems and technologies, and I believe you mentioned a master's in project management, and you also graduated from the University of Maryland in Korean studies. And as if that wasn't enough, you completed the human systems
integration
and the great power competition graduate programs through the Naval Postgraduate School. And I've only known, again, one other person. Shout out to Brandon Smart. He's a Marine Corps person as well. I think if you know him, he's a logistician, I think. But he went to the Naval Postgraduate School, and he's advocating for more enlisted people, at least right now in the Marines, to attend the Naval Postgraduate School. Tell us a little bit about that journey and how that happened for you.
Yeah. So before I talk about NPS, Naval Postgraduate School, it's important to note that higher learning is something that must be afforded to all ranks, right? Now, of course, I get it that when you're a junior Marine, like less than 2 years, you got to learn your job first, right? And you got to be technically and tactically proficient and become the best Marine possible. And this applies to all the services, but I'm just using the Marine Corps as an example, right? It's also important to note that higher learning is not for everybody, okay? But just wanted to throw that out there as well. And there's nothing wrong with that. We need a lot of the folks that have the technical and vocational skill sets to, again, contribute to society in so many different ways, right? But just in talking about this in the context of higher learning and the college education, which I will eventually lead up to the NPS, is that, you mentioned some of the degree programs I worked on. So when I have my bachelor's of science in electronics and technologies, I didn't just take that just to take it. I attained that degree to supplement my technical background in electronics. And then as I increased my roles and responsibilities as a manager, as a leader, everything that we do is project management. So I felt like, you know what? Let me go ahead and get a master's degree that encompasses everything that I've already been doing, but then I get credit for it. But then at an advanced degree level. And that's how I ended up doing that. Now, you mentioned Brandon Smart. I personally don't know him, but I know of him, and also we know the same people. Mm-hmm. But and yes, he's a logistician, and he did get a master's degree out of Naval Postgraduate School. And I do want to make an important note that what I got was a graduate certificate program through the Naval Postgraduate School, but did it twice, right? Now, whether it's a certificate program or a degree, we need more enlisted members to go through NPS. Bottom line, and not just NPS, but through other various academic institutions that are out there, and they are happening now. All of this, in order for us to have leadership buy-in and people to support us, everyone needs to understand that the warfare and the way we fight battles today is different, and therefore, it's important that you try to close that gap. Okay, by no means am I saying that we need to have the same amount of education as officers. Definitely not. But we need to close that gap as much as possible so that way we can achieve the synergy. So on that note, the NPS, Naval Postgraduate School, yeah, it is a premier institution, based out of Monterey, California. And, the beauty about this is that they offer both virtual and in-person, programs. And it has to be balanced through, the mission and as well as the willingness of the commands to support you. But the bottom line is this, is that two examples of this is that the first one, the human systems integration, that had a direct correlation to the job that I've been doing. And so I'm like, oh, let me go for that. But then I had to take the initial step of checking the MAR admin, the Marine Administrative Message traffic, to see that it's even out there. And then I would have to initiate the application process. I would have to provide a compelling statement to my leadership to get the support to allow for me to get that, to partake in that. And then that's what happened with that. However, the second one, the Great Power Competition, because I also served as a foreign area staff NCO, and Great Power Competition was all about fighting the adversaries. And that's in the most layman's term, that's what Great Power Competition is all about, right? And so that had a relevance to my job as a foreign area staff NCO. But that particular opportunity, the interesting thing about it is someone shared with me a flyer, and the flyer said open for 01 through 03 or something like that. It was like, it was only being advertised for commissioned officers. But then I said to myself, well, I feel I'm very qualified to take this class. And I said to myself, let me just go ahead and reach out to the actual professor who's running that particular program. And then next thing you know, I submitted an application and I competed against other officer applicants throughout all the various branches. And I was the only enlisted student in that particular cohort. And I learned a great deal about Russia and about China and all the historical aspects of it and why we are in this great power competition that we are in today, and so ultimately that really helped my job as a foreign area staff NCO. And that's why I encourage that type of program, Naval Postgraduate School or any other partnerships that we have with the various universities that are out there.
And I think what you just talked about is you took into consideration, you included both the needs of the service and the needs of the service member, in this case yourself. How can I become a better asset to the Marine Corps? Well, by getting into this course. And the course, right, by including and considering you, even though they called out for a junior officer, they brought in you as a senior enlisted to include you into the fold. I'm sure it goes without saying you brought a different dynamic to the cohort in a different perspective, because typically and traditionally, right, officers are more strategic, whereas us enlisted, we're more tactical. But I think to your point, when you talk about bridging that gap, you create more symbiotic relationships and more collegiality when you're able to talk across spectrums, right? All that kind of ties into inclusivity. And I think it's a beautiful thing. And it's just awesome to hear those things happening. And I hope to see more people, being included in those cohorts.
And, and this is exactly why we want to create redundancy. We want to make sure that we have the ability to truly have backups in place.
I think that speaks towards force multiplying, right?
It is. That's exactly what I was saying.
To bridge those gaps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Empower your force. Can Can you share or think of any lessons learned or any experience that you had that provided you insights that you walked away with that really, really underscored the power of inclusion and its impact when it's done right?
Yeah, so an immediate example that comes to mind is the us against them mentality, right? And when I was representing Headquarters Marine Corps, and so as part of this team, I would have to go out there analyzing all the various different organizations, ensuring that their readiness and their various maintenance programs were up to par. And so that way, we're always going to be ready for the fight, right? One of the issues that I ran into was, there are other commodities within within our organization. Everything from like ordnance to, let's just say, other functional areas like logistics to even engineering equipment, heavy equipment, et cetera, right? It's a very top heavy unit, okay? And it's because we had a huge responsibility. Again, but then think about if you combine all the years of experience and knowledge that we have. So on paper, that's awesome. You can't beat that, right? And which is exactly why we're representing Headquarters Marine Corps, right? Now, the issue that I ran into was that we also had different sub-cultures built into that, the team. As Marines, yeah, we all share similar values and we have the same share the same culture, but the challenges of the subcultures. We had some personality conflicts, but a lot of it I think was based on a lack of awareness, and often it was a case that I felt kind of out of place, but I shouldn't feel out of place, even as a senior Marine that had been serving for 20 plus years by that point.
Right.
And yet I felt that because of the way some of my teammates were talking to me. That's something that happened to me, just several years ago, right? And so I can't even, honestly talk about it in a really smooth fashion because I somehow feel a little bit impacted or affected by it still to this day. Right. And so that's why I feel that, as a lessons learned, or as a lesson learned here is that, hey, look, we just need to be mindful. We need to be, respectful, but let's try to really go out of our way to learn about each other's backgrounds.
Sure.
We can always agree to disagree. Like that particular group did not, have a positive take on, but we cannot have that divisiveness. Otherwise, we cannot have a unity of effort. Sure. We can't have unit cohesion, and that's an example of something that I've experienced in recent years.
No, you bring up an interesting point, and I'm sorry you went through that, but it sounds like you've been able to kind of take it and get better, right? Become more of an advocate for situations that like those that could have gone better. And I think there's a lot there, right? I think a lot to unpack. One of them is healthy levels of dissent. We have to learn how to fight. I'll share a quick story. I used to get so upset and so frustrated, right? Before COVID and before this virtual stuff, right? I used to go on inspections, and beforehand I would engage with people via email. And then when they finally would meet me, they're like, you look so much different than what you sound like, or you look so much more different than what you sound like on the phone or on emails. You're so well articulated. And that always used to strike a chord with me, right? They say, well, you're Hispanic, right? Mexican. Yeah, I'm Mexican. They're like, you're so well spoken for a Mexican. What the heck do you mean, right? And just, I want to throat punch somebody at that point. But I learned to take those as opportunities for improvement, opportunities for growth, right? Because I can become adversarial and then we're just not connecting. Or I can try and understand them better, create an inclusive environment where we can get that perspective taking. And so I think words matter a lot of times. And until we're able to take that perspective taking approach, right? That introspection, how am I seeing life through? So when I see someone, in your case, you were a Marine, you were a senior person, but because of your demographic makeup, there was this disconnect, which I get rivalries, right? I get, the tip of the spear guys and the people in the rear with the gear, and everyone has their place, and there's a level of rivalry that I think is healthy, but not at the point where it becomes exclusive, right? Because then you have missed opportunities where, oh man, I didn't know you did that. I might be stuck at 80%, and because whatever reason I feel some type of way, I don't realize that you have the 20% that'll get me to 100, and you're probably more than willing to lend it. But because I couldn't see beyond what I'm looking at and my own biases, I couldn't reach across and be humble enough to say, hey, can you help me?
Yeah, that unconscious bias is huge actually. And some examples of my kind of unique way of doing business was I actually created my own business card because it wasn't issued to me. But the reason why I did that was because we were also based out of Okinawa, Japan, and there's like some cultural aspects to exchanging business cards and stuff like that. So and I did it all for a reason. Now, the houses that we live in Japan were very small, right? As I'm sure you're aware. Mm-hmm. So some of the I love me wall, right? I love me pieces, some of the diploma frames and things of that nature. Like I actually just put them around the cubicle I was working at, and it happened to have a wall. Mm-hmm. But then the reason why I felt some sort of negative energy was that because again, I'm not educated just because I'm Asian. I mean, I just happen to have made some decisions along the way to really, sacrifice my personal time and get educated. But everyone just was too hyper-focused on my business cards or me getting business cards from others or about my diploma frames and stuff like that on the wall, right? My academic accomplishments. And somehow that got morphed into my identity that, oh, he's just all about himself, and they basically just, and they may not outright say it, but again, that unconscious bias was that I can sense it.
Sure.
And in some of the words, they may have not had some malicious intent, but the way they said it. An interesting thing is that when I do call them out, all of a sudden, like I'm the guy I'm the bad guy because all of a sudden, like, oh, why are you making this into a bigger deal? But if I'm the only one that's being singled out or talked to a certain way, then I'm going to say something about it. Now, at some point, I was like, you know what? I'm not even going to bother, But then that feeling of being excluded,
sure,
or just feeling just completely left out in some ways, or just being focused in the wrong light. Yeah, that did affect me. Mm-hmm. But I dealt with it. Now, looking in hindsight, I'm actually glad I went through that because that helped build more character. I consider that a little bit of a tiny blip of pain and suffering. Mm-hmm. But again, it built resiliency for me.
Absolutely. And I think it's important that we all go through some form of challenges, right? When I was seeing enlisted, I would always prefer the sailors that weren't the sustained superior performers. Because to me, the way I look at it, and I still do so now, right? I don't know if you're a sustained superior performer because you're staying in your comfort zone or you're just that good, right? The chances are you're just staying in your comfort zone. What I want to see is the person that's going to be willing, right, to suck at something, get better, become a master at it, and then say, hey, I've mastered this. Let me help somebody else get here. And then be willing to drop again and suck at something else. Because when you're doing this, some people might look at it as inconsistent. I look at it as someone who's becoming more and more well-rounded because they're challenging themselves. And that in itself builds resilience. That in itself tells you more about yourself and what you're able to do. And it also can, in turn, inspire others like you.
Well, one side note to that, and I completely agree with everything you stated, is that, it has to be combined with humbleness and humility, right?
Absolutely.
And then, and this one particular individual, we had a fitness report meeting with our officer in charge. And, we were talking about how people are going to be racked and stacked and all those different things. Again, and it's a great meeting. But this one particular individual, a fellow master sergeant, and this guy wasn't even a knuckle dragger. He was like a supply guy, a supply admin guy by trade. But he referred ourselves as cream of the crop. So he kept talking about how like we're the best thing since sliced bread, and that we're all like top performers, and that we're the cream of the crop. And it really rubbed off on me in a very bad way, because like, why would you even have to say that, right? Because, we are there, yeah, for a reason, because of our seniority, our level of experience, and the fact that we are deemed subject matter experts in our respective fields. However, you shouldn't have to refer ourselves in that manner, because that tells me that, to me, it tells me that that individual probably thinks, oh, I got everything figured out. I don't have the appetite to really even listen to other people's opinion, but this is the way I see myself, which is also consistent with the way he talked to me. And maybe because he felt threatened, maybe because of the fact that I had all these academic credentials, and the fact that I was receiving a lot of positive comments or certain accolades with my job. Again, I don't want to assume either, but I can't help but to think, in order for us to, allow others to feel included,
Sure.
Right, and also to just be a great teammate.
Great conversation, Hee Won. I as we kind of get close to the end of the segment, I want to hear more about, be a little bit selfish, and what are some of the things that you've got going on? What are some of your projects you have going on, whether it's professional or personal with your family? What are you reading? What kind of books are you reading these days? And anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah. So in the spirit of what you talked about, in terms of, helping others, I'm always about trying to help others, trying to pay things forward, because I do truly feel blessed with all the things that, have all the successes I've been able to achieve. It's okay to be selfish as long as you're selfless, right? They go, they're like two peas in a pod, because you still have to uplift and enhance yourself, but then you must still help others. Mm-hmm. And that's why, and that's the way I lead my department. What I also have upcoming is, I've signed up to be a career readiness instructor for 4Block. 4Block Foundation is, the mainstream veteran service organizations that, well, I don't know if they're deemed a VSO, but either way, they're an official nonprofit organization that helps veterans and military spouses, and obviously the service members transitioning to the civilian world, setting them up for success. I also happen to be an alumni of that program, and so now I want to pay things forward by becoming a career readiness instructor. So we have this cohort that's going to be starting very soon in September. So that I got that going for me right now. In addition to that, what I did, and it's something that is not coming up, but I still want to share this with you, of what I did recently, right? So I leveraged the Department of Defense Skill Bridge program. Again, it's like a program that, helps bridge the gap between, again, a service member going to the private sector, but doing an internship, right? Or fellowship or some other different type of training program, where the employer, in this case, me, I don't have to pay him, but I'm training him, and he's still getting pay and benefits from the DoD. Mm-hmm. And then this particular individual also happened to be associated with the Hiring Our Heroes program, which is administered through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. And so, long story short, on this example is that I leveraged his employment as an intern from May to July, mm-hmm. and then I was able to fully convert him to a full-time employee. I formally hired him to be one of my program managers, and he's now he onboarded a couple of weeks ago, and he's actually located out of Eugene, Oregon. And so, just wanted to share with the audience and the listeners here that, that right there is an example of a success story where, I got this, fellow service member, who's right at the 10 years, and now I got him a job. But I didn't just get him a job. It's definitely not nepotism. He had to earn it. Right. But he also had the skill sets and the qualifications to get this job. I think
it was that convergence, right? You had the opportunity, he had the skill sets, and it converged, and it worked out. And I think that's awesome, man. I think the skill program is such a phenomenal program, and I think you're doing it right, and I applaud you for that.
One other thing I got coming up now is, in my line of work, I'm in support of the finance industry, but my job as a director of enterprise business resiliency that technically falls within the business continuity space, which is like a separate sector, right, within corporate America, which is applicable to any industry, right? So it's not just in a regulated environment, like, with me being in a financial institution, that type of job can be applied to any organization, any company. And therefore, I've been invited to be a speaker for the Disaster Recovery Institute International annual conference that's going to be, based out of Las Vegas in February 2025.
Well, and I think when there's inclusivity, when these things are premised on inclusivity or inclusion, I think you get more than what you bargain for, right? Not only do you often get the skill sets, but beyond that, right? All the other nuances that make that individual that much more of an invaluable asset, right?
Soft skills.
Yeah, exactly. In your case, the resilience, right? In your case, the language piece, right? You're able to operate internationally, especially with you being bilingual. And so I think all these things said kind of underscore the power of inclusivity when it's done right.
Yeah,
tying it to the mission. And I think when we focus on inclusivity and the inclusion of the things we don't necessarily perceive all the time, when we're open-minded and receptive to those things, we get that cream of the crop. We get those individuals that have the skill sets and then some. And I think that's a win-win, not only for the individual, but also for the organization.
absolutely. So I continue to stay in the fight, but in a different capacity. But then I just want to try to set up my fellow brothers and sisters for success in the private sector. And you asked me about any sort of book I am reading,
what are you reading these days?
Yeah. So the type of books that I'm interested in these days is, again, I don't forget the roots of my time in the Marine Corps in dealing. We talked about great power competition through the postgraduate school. So for example, America Second, which is again is about the rise of the Chinese Communist Party and the things that we need to understand from a geopolitical and entire global landscape, right? From that lens of the implications that are out there and the awareness that we need to have about what the Chinese Communist Party is doing and the entire very unique and dynamic relationship that America has with China, right? So I continue, and I have been for the past couple of years, continue to gravitate towards those type of books. That's what I read.
Awesome. Well, let me ask you this: for people that are interested in learning more about you and just some of the programs that you mentioned 4Block. I know we both met through the Commit Foundation, right? That's another fantastic organization, and there's so many out there. But for those interested that want to reach out and maybe either have you come speak or maybe want to hear more about the things that you're doing, or maybe how PenFed is helping veterans and just in the financial sector, period. How can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so I do try to limit my social media presence, but I can certainly be found on LinkedIn. I want people to reach out to me on LinkedIn, so that way I can be given the opportunity to share that information to the far reaches of folks out there that may not know anything about this.
Absolutely. So 2 more things before we let you go. What quote comes to mind right now? If you had to think one off the top of your head, what's a favorite quote of yours?
Well, it's a quote by Martin Luther King Jr. It was, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy, right? You want controversy and challenges. You want to experience those things. You want to experience some sort of pain and suffering, the opposite of comfort and convenience, right? Absolutely. Because that's going to help build character. That's going to help build resiliency and become a stronger woman, person, anybody, right? Yeah. That's the number one quote for me.
I will tell you, my opinion differs just slightly because I do like being comfortable. But I'll tell you this, I say that, and I say this along with that. I like being comfortable when I know that I'm comfortable because I've overcome some form of challenge or obstacle, right? Because then there was some skin in the game. So it makes me very grateful and appreciative of the level of comfort that I have because of the adversity, because of the challenge that I overcame. So it's one of those kind of, push and pull. There's that yin and yang. Yeah. It's a balance there. Because how can truly, I appreciate warmth if I've never been cold, right? And so
Yeah, you're right.
don't want
Yeah.
to lose sight of that. And I think there is a balance. I don't want to suffer for the sake of suffering, but I do want to be able to know within myself that I can overcome adversity.
I feel that it's a necessity because of the fact that, many of us become husbands and wives, fathers and mothers, and whatever, key, roles that we play within our lives. If we don't have as much of, that comprehensive set of experiences and a background, then it makes things that much more harder for us to be able to pass on knowledge.
Absolutely. Well, Hee Won, it's been an absolute pleasure to have you here today. You're doing some outstanding things. Thank you so much for this time. And I tell you what, any final thoughts, anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Saul, I do thank you for this opportunity for me to share with you and the audience my experiences, the perspectives and insights, and I really do appreciate today's topic about inclusivity. And I do hope that I've been able to bring some value to the listeners.
Absolutely. I have no doubt that you have. Likewise, thank you so much. That does it for us today, folks. Thank you for joining us today on another episode of the Inclusivity EQ podcast. Remember, inclusion knows no bounds. It's the key to unlocking the full potential of our greatest assets, our people. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and please share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag InclusivityEQ. Until next time, stay tuned, stay open-minded, and keep building your own Inclusivity EQ. I'm your host, Saul Gomez. Catch you on the flip side. Out here.
Bye.
Hey, we all want to scale our business. Hey, I have the answer for you today to help you do that. If you're looking to scale from 5, 6, even 7 figures and beyond, book called Be Good, Be Brief, Be Gone. I'm going to give it to you for free. All you have to do is type in growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash, and you can download the book for absolutely free. I hope the book helps you this year. Take your business to the next level. Again, go grab the book, growfast.cash. I say again, growfast.cash. I wish you the best and grow, scale, and win.
Thanks for listening to the Inclusivity EQ podcast with Saul Gomez. Please leave your feedback and visit strategicadvisorboard.com to get the latest and greatest business advisement on the planet. Follow us on social media for updates, and we will see you on the next episode.
There it is. Magnum. Holy moly.
Yeah, baby! That's what I've been waiting for!
Dear God.